All right, so we're diving into this Joe Rogan interview with Mark Zuckerberg from 2025.
Yeah.
You found a real gem here. I mean,
Yeah, it's fascinating.
it's everything from like content moderation
Mm-hmm.
to like the future of tech.
The future of tech.
I think like the big question for us today is like, how has Zuckerberg's thinking on free speech changed, and like, what does that mean for the rest of us? You know?
Well, I think what's interesting right off the bat is like how Zuckerberg's own journey kind of mirrors what we've all seen happen online.
Yeah.
You know, he started Facebook with this almost idealistic vision of like a totally open platform where anyone could have a voice.
It's like the Wild West.
Yeah.
Right? Like no rules, just pure connection.
Exactly.
Then reality sets in.
Reality sets in, and
Yeah.
Zuckerberg actually calls out two big turning points that he sees.
Okay.
One is the 2016 U.S. election.
All right.
And then the other is the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah.
And he says that, 2016, he felt like he was bending over backwards to accommodate what the media was saying and put policies in place that, he now regrets.
So he's like reacting to the criticism instead of sticking to his
principles are a really good way to put it.
Yeah.
And that's a tough lesson for someone in his position.
Totally. Yeah.
And then comes the pandemic,
Right.
which throws everything into overdrive.
Yeah.
And Zuckerberg claims that the Biden administration was actually pushing Facebook to censor information about COVID.
Wow.
Even stuff that was objectively true.
Really?
Like he brings up this example of the Leonardo DiCaprio meme
Oh, yeah.
about the, lawsuits and vaccines.
Yeah.
And apparently the White House wanted it taken down. And Facebook held firm and said, like, no, this is clearly satire.
Yeah.
We're not taking this down.
So, like, where's the line then?
Right.
Like, how involved should the government be in what we see online?
Exactly. And he says that decision to not censor that meme actually led to a ton of heat from the government.
Really?
Investigations, legal pressure, all of that.
That's wild.
It's like, where does legitimate concern end and overreach begin?
It's a slippery slope.
It really is.
This brings up, I think, like a huge question for me, which is like, how do you even moderate content at Facebook's scale?
Yeah, it's impossible.
Rogan brings this up. He's like over 3 billion users.
Right.
There's no way you can have humans looking at every post.
There's no way. And so they rely on algorithms.
Right.
But algorithms come with their own problems.
Of course. Yeah.
Zuckerberg even talks about this risk of mass reporting campaigns.
Yeah.
Where people, corporations, governments could weaponize the reporting systems to silence opposing views.
I mean, can you imagine like if a government doesn't like a journalist or something?
Absolutely.
And they just get their supporters to mass report their account and then they get suspended?
It's a scary thought, right?
Scary.
It's like we're putting all this trust in these systems without really fully understanding how they work.
And speaking of trust, Zuckerberg also admits that Facebook's fact-checking program was a flop.
Yeah, it was well-intentioned.
Yeah.
But he's like, it just created more distrust than it solves.
And he contrasts that with Twitter's community notes.
Right, community notes.
Have you seen this?
I have, yeah.
It's like crowdsourced.
It is. It's crowdsourced.
People are adding like extra context and info.
Exactly.
Instead of just like true or false.
Right. There's a lot more nuance.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And I think people are starting to appreciate that more.
Okay, so it's less about like one central authority deciding what's true and more about giving people the tools to like evaluate the information themselves.
Exactly.
That's cool.
And it's a really fascinating approach. And it seems like Zuckerberg's kind of realizing that trying to be the ultimate arbiter of truth might not be the best way to build trust.
Right.
And this actually ties into a bigger shift that both Zuckerberg and Rogan discuss in the interview.
Okay.
Which is this decline of trust in traditional media and the rise of social media and podcasts as like primary sources of news and information.
Right.
They even talk about this new class of what they call cultural elites that are emerging on these platforms.
You're saying that like influencers and podcasters and even just everyday people with big followings are shaping public opinion.
Absolutely.
In ways that traditional media used to.
That's exactly what's happening.
It's a huge power shift.
It is a huge power shift.
Yeah.
And it's something that, governments around the world are trying to figure out how to handle.
I bet.
On the one hand, it gives people more direct access to information, a wider range of voices.
Right.
But on the other hand, it creates all these new challenges for accountability.
Totally.
Preventing the spread of harmful content.
I mean, this raises some pretty big questions for all of us.
Absolutely.
Like, who gets to decide what's acceptable speech?
Yeah.
In this new landscape.
Right. Like, what are the rules?
And how do we make sure these new cultural elites are responsible with their influence?
It's uncharted territory.
Totally.
It really is.
It's
a lot to unpack.
A lot to unpack, yeah.
But before we get too deep into the philosophical implications of all this,
okay,
let's shift gears for a moment and talk about something a little more personal.
Okay.
Zuckerberg's newfound love for Jiu-Jitsu.
Oh, yeah. Rogan picks up on this.
Yeah.
He's like, you seem different, man.
He's like, you seem physically and mentally different.
Right.
And he attributes it to the martial arts training.
It's interesting. It's like Zuckerberg even shares a story about his wife, Priscilla.
Right.
Encouraging him to keep training after he injured his ACL.
It's really telling.
It is.
Right? Like she saw these positive changes in him and she wanted him to keep going.
And it makes you think about how personal growth can impact leadership, too.
Absolutely.
Like maybe Zuckerberg's finding that like mental discipline and resilience from jiu-jitsu is translating to how he runs his company.
For sure.
Yeah, it's cool.
And then Rogan brings up another fascinating point about anonymity online.
Okay.
He's like, people should be able to discuss sensitive topics without fear of losing their jobs.
Right.
Or facing backlash.
Right.
And he connects this to the pandemic where, some people felt like they couldn't speak freely about their experiences or their opinions for fear of being labeled as like anti-science or a conspiracy theorist.
You wonder how much self-censorship is happening online.
Oh, absolutely.
Because people are afraid.
It has a chilling effect.
Totally.
For sure.
Yeah.
And this ties back into Zuckerberg's, evolving views on content moderation.
Right.
He's clearly wrestling with this tension between protecting free speech and preventing harm.
But it's like a tightrope walk.
It really is.
And there are no easy answers.
Well,
but I think what's really interesting is like the very definition of harm is changing as technology evolves.
Absolutely.
Like what might have been considered harmless speech a few years ago could now have real-world consequences in the lightning-fast world of social media. It's like we almost need a new set of rules.
Yeah, new rules for a new age.
For this digital age.
For sure.
Yeah, but then who gets to write those rules?
Right. That's the question.
That's the question.
It's not just about governments or tech companies anymore. It's about all of us figuring out how to navigate this new landscape responsibly.
All right. We've covered a lot of ground already.
We have.
But there's so much more to discuss.
Yeah, we've only scratched the surface.
Let's take a closer look at Zuckerberg's vision for the future of technology, including his thoughts on VR, AR, and the Metaverse.
Let's do it.
When we return.
Sounds good. Welcome back to The Deep Dive. Before the break, we were just getting into Zuckerberg's evolving views on free speech. And I think the big takeaway there is that it's a really tough challenge.
It's like, how do you protect free expression, but also prevent, the spread of harmful content?
Exactly.
It's a tough balance.
And it seems like Zuckerberg is feeling the weight of those decisions. He talks about how his early faith in free speech was really tested during, the Trump presidency and the pandemic. And it forced him to rethink his approach to content moderation in a big way.
He even admits that Facebook made some mistakes along the way.
He does, yeah. He talks about how, policies that were meant to promote inclusivity sometimes ended up stifling legitimate debate or silencing dissenting voices.
Yeah, it seems like even with the best intentions, things can get messy.
Yeah, absolutely. Like he uses the example of Pete Buttigieg's comments about women in combat roles.
Oh, right.
And he says, Facebook's systems flagged those comments, even though those same comments were perfectly acceptable in Congress. And highlights this really tough challenge of how do you create algorithms that can differentiate between hate speech and legitimate political discussion?
Yeah, I mean, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
Like, who gets to decide what's acceptable speech and what crosses the line?
Right, because you have to remember these tech companies.
Yeah.
They have so much power.
They're basically the gatekeepers.
They're the gatekeepers.
Of information.
Of information, yeah. And they're shaping what billions of people see and hear every day.
Yeah. It's a tough spot to be in.
It is, and Zuckerberg admits there are no perfect solutions. He talks about the trade-offs involved in setting the confidence level for their algorithms.
A confidence level?
Yeah, think of it like this. If the bar for removing content is set too low, You risk taking down harmless posts and censoring legitimate speech. But if it's set too high, harmful content could slip through the cracks and spread like wildfire.
So it's like a lose-lose situation.
It's a tough balance. It really is.
Yeah.
And Zuckerberg says that, based on this dilemma, he actually made a big decision. He decided to adjust Facebook's algorithms to require a higher level of confidence before taking action against a user.
Okay, so that means fewer innocent accounts are going to get mistakenly removed.
Exactly.
But it also means some harmful content might stay up longer.
It could. And that's the trade-off.
Yeah.
And I think it puts a lot of responsibility on users to be more discerning about what they see and share.
Right. So it sounds like he's kind of prioritizing free speech over the risk of some bad content getting through.
He is.
It makes sense in a way, but it also means, users need to be more careful.
They do. They need to be more critical, more thoughtful.
More media literate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it brings us back to the need for transparency and accountability. Facebook needs to clearly explain how these algorithms work, how their policies are developed, and what users can do if they feel like they've been unfairly silenced.
Right, because without that transparency,
Yeah.
it's hard to trust that these decisions are being made fairly.
Exactly. Trust is essential.
Let's shift gears again for a second. I want to go back to Zuckerberg's passion for Jiu-Jitsu.
Okay, yeah.
Rogan picked up on this. He's like, you seem different.
Yeah.
And he's attributing it to the martial arts training.
He is.
It's interesting, Zuckerberg even shared this story about his wife, Priscilla, encouraging him to keep training after he injured his ACL.
Yeah.
She saw the positive changes in him.
And she wanted him to stick with it.
Yeah, which I think is powerful. It kind of shows how personal growth can influence leadership.
Absolutely. It makes you think maybe Zuckerberg's finding that mental discipline and resilience from jiu-jitsu is translating to how we run this company.
Yeah, it's almost like he's found an outlet in jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
A way to kind of express himself and push his limits outside the pressures of being a CEO.
For sure.
You could even draw parallels between training in martial arts and running a company. Right?
Absolutely. Both require strategy, discipline, adaptability.
Yeah.
And this ties into Rogan's point about the importance of anonymity online.
Okay.
He believes that people should be able to discuss sensitive topics without fear of backlash, especially in their professional lives.
Like, think about it. During the pandemic,
Right.
some people were afraid to share their honest experiences or question certain narratives for fear of being labeled as, anti-science or a conspiracy theorist.
Absolutely.
That fear can lead to self-censorship
It does.
and really stifle important conversations.
And that fear can be just as powerful as any algorithm or policy when it comes to limiting free speech.
Right.
It creates this chilling effect where people hesitate to express themselves because they're afraid of the consequences.
Yeah. So it's not just about what platforms allow or disallow.
Right.
It's also about the social climate.
Yeah, it's about the culture.
The pressure people feel to conform.
Absolutely. And that pressure is amplified by the fact that everything we do online leaves a digital footprint.
Right.
And it can feel like there's no room for nuance or dissenting opinions.
Yeah.
One wrong move,
Yeah.
and you could face social or professional repercussions.
That's a scary thought.
It is.
Makes you wonder how many important voices are being silenced because people are just afraid to speak their minds.
It's a real concern.
It makes Zuckerberg's attempts at balancing free speech on Facebook seem even more complex.
Absolutely. It's a constant struggle.
Yeah.
And I think it's a reminder that the conversation about free speech goes beyond just content moderation policies.
Right.
It's about fostering an environment where people feel safe and empowered to express themselves authentically, even if their views are unpopular.
Yeah.
We need to encourage open dialogue and respectful debate.
All right. Before we get too deep into the philosophy of free speech, let's shift back to the future of technology
Okay.
and explore Zuckerberg's vision for how VR, AR, and the Metaverse will change our world. It's amazing, how much Zuckerberg is thinking about the future while also, dealing with all the complexities of the present,
Yeah, it's like he's living in two worlds almost.
Right.
Trying to manage this massive social media empire.
Yeah.
But also looking ahead to, a future where VR and AR and AI
Right.
are going to, reshape reality.
And he's embracing it, too.
He is. He's really enthusiastic about it.
It's cool.
He sees VR and AR not just as, entertainment,
Right.
but as tools for connection.
Mm-hmm.
education, even work.
Imagine like collaborating with colleagues across the planet as if you're in the same room.
It's mind-blowing.
It's crazy.